What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. It is Houston Texans week, week 5. The Bills are on the road for the second of 3 straight in a row. So I'm going to the Texans beat. I'm bringing on my man, Jonathan M. Alexander from the Houston Chronicle. Thank you so much, my man, for taking a few minutes to kind of get us ready for this matchup from a Texans point of view. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, no problem. So you can find Jonathan on X at John M. Alexander, JONM Alexander. You got a free newsletter that people can kind of check out this week, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit separate. I mean, it's the same within the same company in the Houston Chronicle, but a little bit separate. It's called Google search Texans Insider on Houston Chronicle, and you can sign up for it and go right to your inbox.
That'd be perfect as you're getting ready for this thing. And there's a guy there, Stefon Diggs, I think a lot of Bills fans want to read about. So it'd be a good investment all season long. Shouts brought to you by, as always, by Tops Friendly Markets. And right now it's the rush to the Tops Red Zone. Get game day ready with Tops and score big savings, winning recipes, and everything you need for the ultimate game day experience. Head to the Tops Red Zone in store for all your game day essentials and more. And Jonathan, I know everybody thinks that my first question to you is going to be Stefon Diggs related, but I can't. I can't start it with Stefon Diggs. I got to start it with the best wide receiver in the NFL right now, Nico Collins, through 4 games, as good as anybody. I just finished watching Texans Jags, and Nico Collins has taken the kind of jump that I think everybody there hoped that he would into this year. He was really good last year, but he just looks like the elite of the elite. From your perspective through 4 games, how important is he to this Texans offense, to CJ Stroud, and what have you made of his season through 4 games?
Yeah, he's crucial to this offense. You know, when they've struggled, they've often gone to him, and it's reflective in his stats. He's on pace for 2,000 yards. And I don't think he'll keep that up because it's hard to do, but he's really playing at an extremely high level. And really, when you put into perspective what Nico Collins is doing, you look at Nico's first 2 years in the NFL. He didn't have more than 481 yards in either season. And last year he had a breakout year, and he's just picking up where he left off. And he already has more than 481 yards this year. He's just playing at an extremely high level. I asked a lot of people, like, what's the difference in Nico? And they say, one, CJ Stroud, of course. He's got an elite thrower. They said that Nico always had it in him. He just needed somebody to throw him the football. And another thing is he's healthy. He was hurt a little bit in his first 2 years, but now he's healthy and staying on the field, and that's paying dividends right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting coming off the matchup the Bills just had, where it was predicated on the Ravens attack on the ground, the physicality of Derrick Henry, the elusiveness of Lamar Jackson, his ability to get past that first tackler and then run after the catch. I feel like Collins is sneaky the physical element to their offense because of his ability to run after the catch. Like, if you don't bring him down on first contact, it seems like it's a huge problem.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's his best attribute, his yards after the catch. And I think that's also why he's been hurt sometimes, because he's so physical. He's one of the most physical wide receivers in the league. His yards after the catch is why he's so successful. But, you know, once he gets out in space, he's not trying to go down. He's trying to get more yards. And if you don't wrap him up, he can break free for a long game.
So the Texans are 3-1, about the start that I think everybody expected, leading their division, and it's a new offense, right? Like Tank Dell, I want to get an injury update from you in a minute here, but before we get there, you know, Tank Dell, Nico, Stefon Diggs in the passing game, Dalton Schultz as well. How has Diggs kind of assimilated into that offense? What's the pecking order? He's had a really strong start as well. I think it's 20 catches, 250 and 2 touchdowns. So he's still doing Stefon Diggs things. What makes this offense so hard to defend with Diggs now in place where he is?
Yeah, I think it's just the fact that they have so many different weapons that they can go to. Like, Nico Collins isn't their only option. They've been going to him a lot, but say Nico Collins, say you put extra attention on Nico Collins, Stefon Diggs could beat you. Tank Dell can go deep. Tank Dell hasn't had a huge game yet, but we know what he's capable of. He had multiple 100-yard games last year before he got hurt. Dalton Schultz is a big-time tight end. He had huge games for the Texans in week 1. I think that's been one of the Texans' issue, is figuring out how to get everybody involved. Another thing is teams are defending the Texans a lot differently this year than they were doing last year. They're taking away a lot of the deep shots by playing a lot of cover two high safety. And the Texans, I think, recently in the last few games have figured out how to combat that. They've been throwing a lot of intermediate routes, trying to run the ball a lot more effectively. But Stefon Diggs has still is playing at a high level. I don't think he has the same deep threat ability that he used to have, but he's shown that he can be effective in the slot, which they've used him a lot, and catching those intermediate passes and short passes and taking it. And he's found the end zone quite a few times this year.
Yeah, that was always kind of my thought on him. The Bills acquired him when he was 27, maybe 26 going on 27. And I thought it's such a great investment because his game is going to age like fine wine, right? Because you can, once he can't maybe dominate week in and week out on the boundary, you can turn him into this elite slot receiver because of his quickness. Have you seen that a lot? Is that something that they've been talking about, his ability to kind of be everywhere in that offense?
Yeah, he's just a smart guy. He can do everything. He's taken on the role of leadership. He's been one of the vocal leaders on the offense that they didn't really necessarily have a lot of. They had a lot of lead by example guys, and Stefon is very vocal. But just his ability to get open in the slot and expose guys on mismatches has been really good. He had a real big game against the Vikings, even though they lost. And then had a pretty good game against this past week against the Jaguars, where he even ran for a touchdown. He could just do a lot of different things. And I think they really needed that because last year they dealt with a lot of injuries to receivers. And oftentimes towards the end of the year, Nico Collins was their only option. Now you have a variety of options that you can use. And Stefon Diggs has stepped into that role nicely.
I think you guys have met with D'Amico Ryans one time this week already. What is the latest on Joe Mixon and Tank Dell, and what are their chances to maybe return this week?
Yeah, both Joe Mixon and Tank Dell are day to day this week. They'll practice. I expect them to practice, and I expect both to play unless they were to have setbacks. Mm-hmm. Joe Mixon was close to playing last week, but he wasn't fully healthy. And they wanted to give him another week of rest. But I'd expect him to practice, be a full go, because he practiced for the first time on Friday in 2 weeks and to play Sunday. As far as Tank Dell, he had a rib injury, and that was always thought to be a 1 week type of injury. So they fully expect him to come back and play as well on Sunday.
I looked at the run stats for the Texans, and obviously Mixon made a huge impact in his first game, 159 on the ground. And I think through the last 3 games, running backs combined with him kind of nursing that injury, 164 total yards amassed amongst the running backs. How much do you think with him back and healthy changes things in that department? And what's been kind of the struggle to get that run game going the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think you look at weeks 2 and 3 for the Texans were really bad weeks as far as running the football. They couldn't get anything going. I credit a lot of that. 1 to week 3, they didn't have Joe Mixon, but I credit a lot of it to the offensive line just wasn't blocking, wasn't opening up holes. They weren't doing what they were doing in week 1. And there were clear lanes that Joe Mixon could run through when he had that 159-yard game. That same thing wasn't happening week 2 and week 3. And I think they picked up a little bit more steam in week 4. They had a little bit better of a game. Jaguars, of course, aren't as talented as the previous 2 teams, the Bears and the Vikings. But they were able to be a little bit, and that took some of the pressure off C.J. Stroud. And I think they have to do that. And I think Joe Mixon, having the fact that the offensive line is playing a little bit better along with Joe Mixon coming back, should help them because their running game is a catalyst to their offense. If that running game isn't going, the passing game is also going to have its struggles.
Mm-hmm. What's the leadership dynamic there for that offense specifically? You have C.J. Stroud, who's in year 2 here, obviously had that great first season, the early kind of weird exchange with Caleb Williams. He feels like a guy in the room that commands that leadership persona. But with that is interesting because you have Nico Collins, who's this budding superstar, Stefon Diggs, who's the ultra alpha leader type of guy, and then Joe Mixon, who's kind of was that in Cincinnati, very brash, very talkative. What's the dynamic with that group?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say CJ has stepped into a little bit more of a vocal leader role. He's not a yell at you guy. He's more of an encourage you guy, but speaks up. He was very purposeful about that his rookie year, and trying to get to know everybody and trying to be personable, has handshakes with everybody. But again, he's not a super loud, in your face guy. I mean, he's grown a little bit into that, but I think Stefon Diggs has taken on a little bit of that role, as far as like a loud, vocal guy, encouraging the team constantly. Nico Collins is more of a quiet guy. You tell him what to do, he'll go do it. And Joe Mixon is a lead by example guy. I think the guys have a lot of respect for Joe Mixon, just what he's done throughout his career. He's a guy who will run you over, and they follow that. So they have a lot of various leaders who do different things and serve in different roles for them.
Mm-hmm. Before we get to the defensive side of the ball, become a Shout Buffalo Bills insider right now, 716-528-6727. Text that number, 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month after that. And the Shout text line is brought to you by Carrie C. Byer, attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro, located at 237 Main Street in Buffalo, New York. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give them a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com. All right, Jonathan, on the defensive side of the ball, I feel like this defensive line with Danielle Hunter added to the mix had that just absolute stud-like performance in week 2 against the Bears. You have a veteran in Jerry Hughes, who the Bills fans know very well from his time in Buffalo. Obviously, Will Anderson Jr., former top pick as well. Tim Settle, a guy that's been in Buffalo the last couple of years, never really found his niche or got it going enough to hang on, but had 2 sacks a couple weeks ago. Has been really good for them so far, it appears. What's the makeup of this defensive line? How did they perform against Jacksonville? And what do you make of this group?
Yeah, they didn't have a single sack last week. I think for the most part, they've been a really good defense. They've gotten after the quarterback, gotten a lot of pressure. And they were, before last week, were number 2 in sacks, I believe. But last week, they didn't get a lot of sacks on Trevor Lawrence. And I think a little bit was that by design. Trevor Lawrence doesn't typically hold on to the ball, even though the Bills got after him. He likes to get the ball out pretty quickly. I think if you hold the ball long enough, you do give the Texans enough chance to get after you. Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter are 2 elite stars on the edge. I think the defensive tackle room has been a little bit inconsistent. Fali Fatukase, Mario Edwards, they've been pretty good, but they're not huge names. And then Tim Settle has been a rotational player who's really kind of come on the last 2 weeks. He had a sack in the previous game against the Vikings. Didn't have one this time, but he's actually looked good. He's improved. I think the defensive line, particularly the interior, is a work in progress that's getting better. But they definitely have elite guys like Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter on the outside. They just have to be a little bit more consistent.
Yeah, that to me is the matchup. One of the matchups I'm super keyed in on this week, because Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins for the Bills both struggled. Spencer Brown more so against Kyle Van Noy and company for the Baltimore Ravens. Jason Owe, David Ajabo, they all really put a lot of pressure on them. They were throwing a lot of different pressure packages at the Bills that I think really made that group uncomfortable. In the first 3 weeks, they were about as good as an offensive line group as there was in the league. So I'm wondering, like, defensively and schematically, how creative does D'Amico Ryans and company get with the pressures that they send? Is there a linebacker that you think that might be a candidate as a real heavy blitzer, or will they employ a potential spy against Josh Allen?
Yeah, I think they could potentially. They've shown a propensity to send a blitz, which isn't really D'Amico Ryan's MO. He hasn't enjoyed sending blitzes, but he's done that quite a bit in the last 3 weeks ago, since that week 2 game against the Chicago Bears. And it worked. It worked a little bit against the Vikings. They like sending pressure with Azeez Al-Shaair sometimes, and sometimes Jalen Petrie, who plays the nickel. And they like to do different things with their defensive line and do different stunts. And I'm sure they'll probably use Jalen Petrie as a kind of a spy. He plays in that nickel role, but he's oftentimes in the box and one of their fastest defenders. and they really like him, and he's playing at a high level ever since he moved down from safety to nickel cornerback. So if there is a nickel, because they don't have Christian Harris this week, who's still on the IR and likely won't play on Sunday, they'll probably use Jalen Petrie in that role to keep an eye out on Josh Allen in case he decides he wants to scramble.
Yeah, Petrie's got potentially quite a task on his hands. That Christian Kirk touchdown on that crosser there last week reminds me a lot of what I think the Bills would try to do, putting Khalil Shakir in that spot, maybe even Dalton Kincaid from a tight end perspective. Through the first 4 games, how have the Texans defended tight ends? Because Kincaid had a really nice touchdown catch against the Jags 2 weeks ago, but for the most part, I don't think he's had necessarily the start or has been as hot as I think Bills fans were hoping. How do you feel like the Texans as a defense defend tight ends?
Yeah, that play you mentioned, that was actually a brilliant play. They used one of the other receivers to rub off Jalen Petrie, which created enough separation for Kirk to get that touchdown. It was great. For the most part, I think the Texans have done a great job. They've had Jalen Petrie on tight ends, but they haven't faced a lot of great tight ends. Like last week, Evan Ingram did not play for the Jaguars. The Vikings were also missing their TJ, missing their star tight end. So they kind of, in a sense, lucked out against facing some of the top tight ends in this league. In the past, they've used Jimmy Ward, who had a groin injury and has missed, who missed last week, and he might not play this week. So it'll definitely be on their attention because they know what Kincaid can do. He's a great young tight end. So I'm sure they'll have that attention on him, and it'll be a big test for them. They haven't played a tight end yet through 4 weeks of his caliber.
The live show is streaming right now across all the platforms, and on YouTube, one of our commenters with a super chat. Got to bring it on here. I don't know if we're necessarily going to go too much into this. Chances that the Bills actually make a move to take advantage of the Chiefs and Bengals down year. I don't know if it's a down year for the Chiefs. They're 4-0 right now. We need more in the secondary and wide receiver depth. I think obviously this and thank you for the super chat, Donald. This is a comment on the news that Devontae Adams could be very much on the trade market. I don't think the Bills can afford it. I also don't know if at 32 years old, that's what he's going to turn this season. That makes the most sense. We'll hit on more of that tomorrow on the Wednesday show when Ryan is back in the mix. For right now, I want to stick on the Texans. And I want to ask you a question that was asked on a local radio spot before I started today. They wanted to know my perspective, like, okay, how much is there going to be potentially bulletin board material this week? Because Diggs in Buffalo for all these years, Josh Allen and company playing with him, and this is the first time they're playing each other. My answer was on the Buffalo side, I think it's going to be all rosy. I think it's going to be all love. I don't think there's going to be anything that could potentially be misconstrued. Josh Allen almost got in front of it last week by correcting kind of the way things unfolded after the Jags game, when maybe one of his quotes was kind of taken, I don't know if it was out of context, but the context that he wanted it to be in wasn't exactly right. From a Texans perspective, what do you think the discourse is going to be starting tomorrow when media starts?
Yeah, I think they'll want to get Stefon Diggs as motivated as possible. I've talked to several players around the locker room, and they say he doesn't really talk about Buffalo. And he told us that was his motto, not to talk. He don't talk about his old girlfriend to make his new girlfriend feel good. Which went pretty viral. But I'm sure he's well aware of what Josh Allen said, even though Josh Allen said he wasn't talking specifically about Diggs. And I'm sure that'll be a motivating factor into him. I mean, he was motivated to go against the Vikings, and that was a game and he got traded away from there years ago and had his best performance of the season. So, to be honest with you, I really do think Bobby Sawyer is going to try to put the ball in his hands, knowing that the Bills will have attention on Nico Collins, being that he's the best receiver. He's been the best receiver in the league this year. They'll try to put the ball in Stefon Diggs' hands and see what he can do. And I'm sure that Stefon Diggs will be motivated to try to have one of his best performances. And I know CJ is probably going to try to feed it to him too.
Yeah, I think both sides are going to be equally motivated. I think Josh Allen, to your point, he's never publicly said anything but glowing, loving things about Stefon Diggs. But, man, there's more to that relationship that I think will come out at some point down the road, whether it be on a podcast appearance by somebody, when the dam breaks a little bit and you let out a little bit. Because for it to go so well the way it did early on, and then for the way that it kind of deteriorated, I've said all along that the Texans' approach to Diggs, like restructuring the deal, making it this 1 year all in with him in a year where this is probably the last bit of prime that he has left, it's almost perfect. And a way to maybe bring him in, his work ethic is well documented to show some of the younger guys in that room and then restock the cupboards. How's Robert Woods fit in all this? I wanted to ask you too. Another former Bill from a couple lifetimes ago. How has he fit in? And that's kind of a really nice collection of talent in that room. And then you got John Mechie, who I think was a hot name on the trade market this offseason after they acquired Diggs. Like, is that somebody that maybe can get out of there? But I don't think the Texans were too eager to listen to those.
Yeah, I think Robert Woods has been interesting because, before the season, there was a lot of talk about whether the Texans, after they traded for Diggs, whether the Texans would release him because they could save $5 million in salary cap space. But when I look back on the Robert Woods offseason, he was at every offseason event. He made sure he was available there. He had dealt with some injuries his first year with the Texans. He was healthy throughout. And I think he's doing everything he can to stay on the field. He's even in the kick return game. He ran a couple of kick returns after they benched their kick returner for a fumble, which I thought was super interesting. He is like one of their better run blocking wide receivers. So he's trying to ingratiate himself in the run blocking scheme. And occasionally he'll be there available to catch a pass. And they know that he's a good possession wide receiver if they need him. But I think he's just doing everything he can to try to get on the field. He might not have the same caliber ability that he used to have, but he's trying to figure out multiple ways to make himself useful. As far as John Mechie goes, he's the youngest wide receiver on the team. And, I think they believe that he can, with more maturation and improvement, he could potentially step into an increased role next season. And I think that's part of the reason why they're keeping him around. The reason why he probably doesn't play as much is because he doesn't play special teams. I think that's one of the things that's hurting him. They have so many weapons at wide receiver. And John Mechie doesn't play special teams, so he finds himself inactive. But they recognize that he has a lot of potential. And if, say, Stefon Diggs leaves for another team, which is probably likely the case, then they think that with some improvement, John Mechie could step into an increased role as a number 3 or number 4 receiver.
Interesting. One more before I let you out of here. How do you feel like this game goes for the Texans? 3-1, really great start. They're going to face a Bills team that is obviously going to be licking its wounds and looking to come back from a really devastating performance after the red hot start. Do you like them in this spot? Do you feel like they're ready for this kind of big time game? Not that the Jags game wasn't big. They've been playing big time games. The Bears game was big a couple weeks ago. But how do you like them in this spot?
I do. My power rankings in my head. I don't put it out anywhere. I should, but I have the Bills as the 4th best team in the NFL, and I think I have them as the 5th, and I have the Texans as the 6th best team. I think those two teams are neck and neck. And I think it honestly could go. It's so close. I think it could go either way. Whoever has the best game plan is a team that wins. Like I mentioned, I think the Bills are just a little bit better than the Texans right now. I think Josh Allen is playing at an extremely high level. I think the Texans probably would have wished they would have got Josh Allen after a win so they can, catch him sleeping. But because I know the Bills are going to be highly motivated to prove that what happened against the Ravens was a fluke. But I think what happened also showed that the Texans have some weaknesses. Not the Texans, I'm sorry. The Bills have some weaknesses, and the Texans think that with getting Joe Mixon back, that they could potentially exploit those weaknesses. But, the Texans certainly have weaknesses too. They can get beat in the deep passing game, which Josh Allen has obviously shown that he has an explosive arm and can beat them. If the Texans are not prepared for it, it could be an ugly game. So I think it could go either way. Whoever has the best game plan, whoever plays the best defense, I think gets a win. And I think the Bills are just slightly ahead of the Texans right now.
Very good stuff, man. Before we get out of here, the Topps Quarterback Blitz is on right now until October 12th. Shop over 25 of your fan favorite brands with your bonus plus and earn a quarterback for each one you buy. There's no limit to the savings you can rack up. Head over to topsmarkets.com for more information. Jonathan, this is great stuff. I can't wait to get down to Houston this week. One more shout out. Let everybody know where they can find you this week leading up to game time.
Yeah, you can find me on X at John M. Alexander. That's JONM Alexander. And you can find all of our content on HoustonChronicle.com.
Beautiful stuff. Can't wait. Texans week is here. See you guys all tomorrow. Take care, everybody.